Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the horrific tragedy that took place on Lag BaOmer in Meron. 45 people were trampled to death in Israel. Hundreds were injured. The event took place on Lag BaOmer in Meron, located in the Galilee near Safed, Tzfat, in the northern part of Israel. Meron is not far from the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Kinneret. I know one of the victims. He was a 19-year-old studying in Israel for his gap year. He was a classmate of my son. 45 people who came together in celebration were trampled to death. The bare facts are horrific. You were trampled to your death as you were caught in a rush of people. You stumble, you fall, you are pushed down, you fall on top of others, and then others fall on top of you, and others on top of them. If you're lucky, you're injured. Most die of asphyxiation. They suffocate, unable to move or to breathe because people just like you, are rushing to get out. The scary and unimaginable truth is that in many cases, in this case, you were trampled by family or friends, the people you came to the event with, and the people you are leaving with when the crowd loses control. And when the crowd loses control, no single person can stop the onslaught. Crowds form a current, more powerful than the riptide. If you fall, there is no getting up. This Lag BaOmer celebration in Meron was the first massive gathering in Israel in 14 months, the first since COVID ruptured the country and the world. Israelis have begun living a new normal life. They've been permitted to go maskless when outdoors for some time already. Schools are open, businesses are up and running. Tourism has not yet snapped back. Borders are still semi-sealed, but that too will slowly open up. And so, when the first opportunity arose, they flooded the roads and headed to Meron. Lag BaOmer is the 33rd day of the Omer. The Omer is the 49-day period that's counted between Passover and the Pentecost holiday, also known as Shavuot. The 33-day is a minor holiday. Annually, on this day, Jews from Israel, and when permitted around the world, visit the grave site of Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the luminary who wrote the Zohar in traditional world, the foundation of Jewish mysticism. The 33rd day of the Omer is the anniversary of his death. The Hebrew letters Lamed and Gimel, when combined together, form the acronym LAG. And LAG in Hebrew is the numerical equivalent of 33. Last year, the celebration at Meron, which traditionally consists of prayers and lighting of bonfires, was canceled because of COVID. 2019, 500,000, 500,000 people attended the bonfire celebrations. This year, the same number was expected, but was a little lower. The tomb sits on top of a small mountain, and there is only one way up and the same way down. On top of the mountain, there is plenty of space. People set up makeshift tents, enclaves, days in advance to make certain that they have a good access to the grave and the festivities. The stampede at Meron is horrible, horrific, and tragic. Just as horrible and tragic is the knowledge that this was not an isolated incident. Stampedes happen all too often at religious events, cultural events, concerts, soccer games, and often are caused because of bottleneck of people pushing to get out of a tiny portal. There is a long history of stampedes. On December 3rd, 1979 in Cincinnati, 11 people were trampled to death at a concert of The Who. The concert was general admission, which means that there was no assigned seating. In Saudi Arabia and Mecca, around the Muslim religious celebrations of the Hajj, there were 5 different stampedes in history. The worst tragedy of Mecca was in 2015, where 2,262 people were trampled to death. 934 were injured. These are the official numbers. The real numbers are probably much higher, even twice as high. A fire broke out in Coconut Grove Hotel in Boston in 1942. There was a single exit. A revolving door got stuck because so many people were inside of it, and 492 people died. 130 were injured. Stampedes have happened all over the world, in the United States, in the Middle East, in India, in Africa, in South America. They happen wherever large crowds gather. In Lima, Peru, in 1964, Peru was playing Argentina in a very competitive soccer match. The referee made an unpopular call, and the fans stormed the field. In response, police fired tear gas. The crowd ran to escape, and 322 people were trampled to death. Most of them, of course, by suffocation. after being trampled. It's a horrible way to die. It speaks to the power of the group. It speaks to the power of momentum. Good people, decent people, people who would never knowingly be party to an act that claims innocent lives, are now part of that group that unintentionally took lives. May the souls of the dead people be blessed, and may the survivors be granted physical and emotional healing. This is a very difficult time. Background is important. In order to best understand just how traumatic this catastrophe is, I should explain that Meron sits on top of the mountain. There is only one way in and out. In 2019, 500,000 people were at Meron for Lag BaOmer, and last year the celebrations were totally canceled. That means that something is happening. This year, police said that over 120,000 people, mostly men, attended the celebration. Most years, the crowd is staggered, that's what's important, over the entire day and night. However, this year, because last year was canceled, and because this year's Lag BaOmer was Thursday night and would be ending as Shabbat enters, people could not make the trip during the day on Friday for fear of not getting home in time for Shabbat. So many more than usual were there at night on Thursday night into Friday morning. The crowds were more intense. As people were descending the mountain, they began to fall, one after the other, one on top of the other, and they were trampled upon. Lag BaOmer is a celebration, a tribute to Rashbi. That's the abbreviation, the acronym of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rashbi, the traditional author of the Zohar, the work that forms the foundation of Jewish mysticism. And this is what's critical. People come to Meron to commemorate his yahrzeit, the anniversary of his death. He said, "You should celebrate my death." That's what he writes. They go to Meron to light bonfires. Why? There are many reasons. In the Zohar, Shimon Bar Yochai is frequently referred to as Butzina Kadisha, which in Aramaic means the holy candle. The Zohar describes that when Shimon Bar Yochai died, he ascended to heaven, and he did so in a fire. The Zohar actually means splendor, which means light. So in his honor, on this day, year after year, bonfires are lit, and people ascend the mountain called Meron. Next year, I don't know what will happen. I don't know. Hopefully, it'll be safer. Coming up next, points of view. First up is an op-ed from the Wall Street Journal. It was published on Friday, April 30th, 2021. It was written by Ari Lamb. Rabbi Lamb is the founder of the Joshua Project and the chief executive of B'nai Zion. In print, the column was entitled "Beyond a Shul with a Pool." Online, the piece is called, get this, "The Prospects of American Religion Have Never Been Higher," subtitled, "Brick and mortar religious communities are shrinking, but digital worship is growing." The print title is much pithier. Online, editors have more space, so they don't have to work on the titles. Online, the headlines are often dull and descriptive. In print, space is limited, and the headline writers work hard to convey the essence of the piece in a very limited number of words and letters. That art of headline writing soon will be gone as print newspapers continue to wither. Lamb begins by setting the stage and discussing the fate and future of religion in the United States. He writes, "A recent Gallup poll included some grim news. Less than 50% of Americans belong to a religious community, such as a church or a synagogue. The lowest since the organization began asking the question in 1937. As an Orthodox rabbi, I might feel gloomy about the future of my profession, but the prospects of American religion have never been brighter." This isn't solely a testament of faith. When the Pew Research Center asked Americans in 2012 to describe their feelings about spirituality, only 19% said they felt any spiritual stirrings. 5 years later, that number rose to 27%, even as the number of Americans who define themselves as neither spiritual or non-religious remained largely unchanged. While more Americans yearn for more spiritual connections, fewer feel comfortable finding them in traditional settings. Now Lamb explains that this feeling is part of a continuing trend and is to be expected. But here too, he finds it to be good news. He continues, "This isn't news for those of us who have dedicated our lives to the rabbinate of the priesthood. The reasons for the decline in synagogue and church attendance range from the changing nature of cities in competition with digital communication, Congregating with others in the physical space is a cornerstone of most faiths. I happily do it 3 times daily. But there's much more to religion than sitting quietly on their wooden bench and listening to a sermon. Lamb explains that there is a very positive way of viewing this situation, provided the leadership can pivot and meet their flock where they are. And so he writes, seen this way, the new Gallup survey should be read not as an obituary, but as an opportunity. Religion is ripe for disruption. To borrow a term from the Silicon Valley, plenty of Americans still love the product, just not its current platform. Nimble individuals and organizations have a chance to create communities of faith every bit as vibrant and meaningful as those that once huddled in brick and mortar buildings. How this is to be done is perhaps the most important question for American civic life in the coming decades. Now Lamb explains, as I have been maintaining for the past few months, that COVID wreaked havoc on the brick and mortar side of synagogues and churches and mosques. During COVID, he writes, services offered during the pandemic were just that, religious services. They were not, as so many felt compelled to offer before the pandemic struck, social gatherings with thin religious veneers. For decades, houses of worship have flourished with the American suburb, serving as a focal point of communal life. In Jewish circles, this is known as a shul with a pool, suggesting that congregants should see the synagogue as the destination for everything from Sunday school to a quick swim. This model is fading, and organizations that focus on the heart of the matter, the prayers and the rituals and rites, are likely to reap the rewards. Lamb concludes by offering insight from the legendary comedian Lenny Bruce. He tells us that in reality, religion and the buildings of religion are not the same. Rabbi Ari Lamb puts it this way: no doubt that there will be troubling poll data about the ostensible decline of faith in American life. But we should remember the words of that great Talmudic scholar, Lenny Bruce, who quipped that everyday people are straying away from the church and going back to God. Bruce is aptly describing the Pew survey and religion in the United States. Next up is an editorial from the Jerusalem Post that was published on May 2nd, 2021. Remember, editorial is the view of the editorial board, unauthored, that is without a title. The topic is diaspora affairs, and the editorial explains the symbiotic relationship between Israel and the diaspora. It explains the fact that each one needs the other. This is how the editorial begins. Israel and the Jewish diaspora are not exactly a love story these days. A growing segment of American Jews, for example, speak of an increasing feeling of disenchantment with Israel and the government's policies. Both communities appear at times to be moving farther away from one another. This is the result of a number of catalysts. There is lack of Jewish education, increased assimilation, and an overall deterioration in Jewish identity among the diaspora. There are also decisions that the state of Israel has taken in recent years that have contributed to this feeling. A previous government led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu canceled an earlier cabinet ruling to establish an egalitarian prayer plaza at the Western Wall. Ultra-Orthodox political parties continue to hold control over all matters of religion and state here, and the state continues to ban civil marriage. The editorial lays out the problems in the relationship and then continues. Netanyahu, many Jews in America feel, grew too close to former U.S. President Donald Trump. These Jews vote Democrat, and his recent moves aimed at undermining Israel's judicial system have added to the feeling that Israel is no longer the democratic and Jewish state they thought it was. To repair this situation, work is needed, and this work requires an investment of resources, as well as the attention of the state's next government. That's why any intention to shut down the Diaspora Affairs Ministry in a future government would be a mistake. Israel needs the diaspora, and the diaspora needs Israel. A live, operational, and budgetary ministry is key for this relationship to thrive. The editorial now illustrates even more examples of the tensions that exist between Israel and the diaspora and the need to work them out. The editors are emphatic about the conviction that Israel cannot close the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. The editorial concludes, Since its inception 73 years ago, Israel has taken pride in being the state which all Jews can call their home. For this to happen, diaspora Jews need to be made to feel that they have a home here and that there is someone listening to them and thinking about them. We understand the need to cut spending and establish a government with less ministries, but the diaspora is not something to be sacrificed. Israel needs a diaspora affairs ministry, and diaspora Jewry needs a strong Israel. Keep the ministry open. This is a very important editorial. Thank you for writing it. Coming up next, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 7 cartoons today. I want to start by showing you a cartoon that caused a diplomatic row. The Chinese embassy in Japan tweeted an anti-Semitic cartoon and then deleted it at the behest of Israel's foreign ministry. The cartoon featured an image of the Grim Reaper wearing an American flag and carrying a scythe embossed with an Israeli flag as he goes from door to door and leaves a bloody trail behind him. The doors are labeled Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Egypt. The tweet in Japanese said, "If the United States brought democracy, it would be like this." The cartoon demonized Israel, and that's exactly what the Israeli ambassador to Japan, Yafa Ben-Ari, told her Chinese counterpart, Chen Yanghua. Yanghua said he had not even noticed that Israel was part of the image. This was a major diplomatic faux pas. How could the Chinese ambassador not see the Israeli flag on the scythe there? Unless he was not paying too close attention to the cartoon at all. And if he was not paying attention to it, that makes the entire situation even worse. Second up is a man getting his COVID vaccine. He's crying and bawling. His wife tells the person giving the injection not to worry, she explains. He's crying because after the vaccine, he'll have to wear pants and go to work. That's funny. The saddening reality is that things are starting to get back to normal, or as I say, a new normal. Some people will still work from home. Others who have gotten used to working remotely will wish that they were still working from home. That's just the new reality. This next cartoon says it all. 2 men are outside, one with a mask and one without. The man without a mask says, "I've been vaccinated and we're outdoors. With no one around, the risk of infection is next to zero. So why the mask?" The second guy says, "If you must know," then he pulls out a pistol and holds his hand out as if to say, "Give me your money or your life." This is a holdup, the good old-fashioned kind. The artist is saying that masks might be heading back to their original intent, as we say. This next mask cartoon is one of dozens of cartoons which are all very similar. 2 people are walking outdoors and one says to the other, "Don't you wish we didn't have to wear masks anymore?" And the second says, "Are you kidding? It's allergy season." Last week I showed several cartoons of the Grim Reaper, and here's another. The Grim Reaper is hugging an anti-vaxxer, and he says, "Love you guys." As if it's not too obvious, the people who don't get the COVID shot have a very clear destiny with the Grim Reaper. India has been hit very hard by COVID. Here is a cartoon that depicts that India needs help. Plain and simple, it reads SOS. In a single month, April 3rd to May 2nd, COVID cases increased from nearly 0 to 20 million and 300,000 deaths. This is how fast COVID can spread if unchecked. This last cartoon is a statement about the drop in popularity of professional sports. 2 children look as if they're playing Trivial Pursuit with their parents. One asks, "Dad, what's professional basketball?" He answers, "Something we used to watch to get away from politics." So true, and sports ratings continue to drop and drop and drop. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Azerbaijan's economy minister, Mikhail Jabarov, announced that Azerbaijan will open an office in Tel Aviv. The office will advance tourism and diplomacy. Israeli Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi has said about Azerbaijan, "Azerbaijan is our greatest friend and energy supplier. We will continue to work to develop relations." That's a quote. This is new, important, and very good news. Azerbaijan and Israel have had diplomatic relations for over a decade. Azerbaijan is a Muslim country. Azerbaijan has tremendous assets of oil and natural gas. Advancing tourism will help both countries. Israel is starting to let tourists enter the country. Hopefully, the doors will soon be open to every tourist who wishes to enter. Until now, Israeli authorities have been vigilant, not letting tourists in and even putting returning Israelis through a very rigorous regimen. Some have worn ankle monitors, others were put in forced isolation in hotels, still others isolated at home. How can Israel's behavior be compared to other countries? That's a good question. The Jerusalem Post asked the question of health professional government sources. The source responded, obviously anonymously, they did not want their name to be mentioned. It said, countries around the world are open to varying degrees. You have countries like Australia and New Zealand, which are totally shut to tourists. And then there is the European Union, which says that EU citizens can only move from country to country under certain conditions. Then you have countries like Estonia, Iceland, Slovenia, that are letting in vaccinated people from certain countries only. Then, on the other hand, we see countries like Greece, Cyprus, and Portugal rushing to let people in as fast as they can. As a rule of thumb, countries whose economies are heavily dependent on tourism are willing to take greater health risks to reopen than others. In Israel, about 250,000 people are in the tourism industry. That's directly. But in others, it makes up 20% of the GDP. Not bad. I predict that Israel will slowly continue to open. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis are employed in businesses connected to tourism. Hotels, for example, are slowly opening. Only 30% are now still closed. Tourism is certainly going to bolster and even lift Israel's economy. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas announced first to his cabinet and then to the EU and then to the world that he's postponing Palestinian parliamentary elections scheduled for the end of May. The EU asked to delay the announcement to give them time to influence or pressure Israel. Why pressure Israel? Because the reason given for the postponement was that Israel was not permitting people living in Jerusalem to vote in the election or to run for Palestinian parliament. While that is true, it is by no means the reason behind the postponement. The real reason is that the polls, as well as common sense, show that Hamas has united a party and a campaign while the PA is divided into many factions. If the election were held, Abbas's party would lose seats and lose power. According to all polls, Hamas looks to gain the overwhelming plurality in an upcoming election. A victory for Hamas would be the end of Abbas and the Palestinian Authority. It would also mean the very different relationship between Israel and the Palestinians. As I have been predicting over the past several months, there is no way Abbas will allow for an election and then lose. This next point is very interesting. Delek Drilling, one of Israel's largest energy companies, is selling 22% of Tamar, one of its offshore natural gas fields, to a conglomerate owned by the government of Abu Dhabi called Mubadala. The price of the sale was set for $1.1 billion. As of now, the gas field, which has exceeded all expectations and is successfully driving down the price of natural gas in the region, is jointly owned by Delek Drilling, Chevron, and Isramco, which is an Israeli energy company. And smaller partners are also around. Delek Drilling is owned by Israeli billionaire Yitzhak Tshuva. This is very good news. The idea that Israel is becoming a player in the region's energy market is significant. The fact that Arab countries are partnering with Israel in energy drilling and marketing is monumental. Times are changing. 10 years ago, no one ever would have thought that this was a dream, that this could possibly happen at all. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that the Hebrew alphanumeric code is called gematria? Some of you I know knew that. In Hebrew, the letters equal numbers. Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, is equal to 1. Bet, the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, is equal to 2, and so on. The word gematria is Aramaic, and it derives from the Greek word geometry, which means to measure. The central element within gematria is the examination of the meanings behind words or groups of words that have same or similar numeric values and equivalents. Comparing those words. This is particularly prevalent in Kabbalistic and mystical commentary. Conclusions are often drawn based on the numerical equivalence. Some people do it for fun, others do it for humor, and others do it for biblical commentary. Here's one. The gematria for chet, or sin, is 17, which is the same gematria for egoz, which means nut. So there is a long-standing Jewish tradition of not eating nuts on Rosh Hashanah. The number 18, when reversed, is chai, or life. And that's why 18 is such a common good luck number in Judaism. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.